Welcome everybody to today's panel. So today's panel is fascinating, and we're going to hear all about what their authors find interesting about their own books. So I'm the moderator, JJ or Jess, and I'm going to be asking the authors some questions. So we're going to speak to each author one by one. Before we begin, just Zoom basics. You've probably heard them a million times if you've been on the other panels, but you can set your screen to gallery view so that you can see everybody. And the chat role is live for comments, but please hold any questions until the end. If we have time, I'll get to them then. And just all the other authors, if you could just mute while everyone else is speaking, if it's not your turn. So, okay, first up, I'm going to go with who's on my screen. So, Carson, I'm going to go to you first. So, Carson Tate's goal as an author is to spin tales with plot lines as interesting as the cases she encountered in her career as a criminal defense lawyer. She's the award-winning author of over 30 novels of romance or romantic intrigue, all of them featuring strong women, many of whom face off in the arena of the courtroom. Her latest novel is Trial Run, the final installment in the Courting Danger series. She's currently working on her next book, which is Two Truths and a Crime, which will be available in December. I love that name, by the way. So we'll start off with I suppose, the main topic of this panel, which is what most interests you about your book and why?
So this is the book. It's not the book, it's a postcard with a picture of the book. It's the third book in the Courting Danger series. And when I pitched this series, I pitched three books. And I was so excited to have three ideas all at once. And the first book was about a prosecutor and a defense attorney, and the second book was about a defense attorney and a judge. And then I pitched the third book to be about two jurors but set in the same universe with this overarching plot. And so I wrote the first two books, and while I was in edits for the second book, I started whittling around on the third. And then I realized I'd made a grave mistake. And that's what I get for plotting in advance, or not plotting enough in advance, as I'm prone to be guilty of doing. And I realized that, and Sherry, you're going to know this because you work in the court system, the jurors wouldn't have any interaction with the prosecutor and defense attorney and the judge. And so, how was I going to bring these people into this world and keep the plot going while staying in the point of view of these two main characters that had nothing to do with the other people? And so, since I was still in edits on the second book, I was able to make some changes so that I could use one of the characters from the second book to be one of the jurors. She was a courtroom. They call them courtroom coordinators here in Dallas, but they're kind of like courtroom deputies, courtroom secretaries. They have different names for them, but they're basically the judge's right-hand person. And they do everything for the judge. And this particular character had done everything for Reggie, had worked for one of the judges in the second book. And so I was able to pull her in and make her be a juror, which of course no one who works at the courthouse expects to ever be picked for a jury. That's just it's not normal. But she wound up being picked for this jury. So the thing that fascinated me the most about this book is I have been called for jury service a million times and have never been chosen because I worked at the courthouse for many years. Um, and so they would either strike me before it even started, or they'd wait till the first break and then they'd be like, get the hell out of here. We don't want you on our jury, neither side. And so I've had the opportunity to testify as a witness at a trial, at a murder trial. Um, and then I've worked as a defense attorney, and I thought adding juror to my checklist would be just a great fun experience. But I never have gotten to do that. And so I thought I will just write about it. And so that's the thing that fascinated me about this book, is trying to delve into what happens in the jury room, what happens with jurors, what are they thinking? And that's my very long answer to your question.
Good answer. So, like you've written a lot of books that feature criminal justice system. Obviously, you've mentioned a bit about the juror side of it, but what else makes this different, or is that the main thing?
I mean, that's the primary aspect, I would say. And also just trying to weave that into the overall plot. I have written another series where there was a plot that arced over several books, and that's always challenging because you forget things, and and also to leave enough details along the way that you have something to make into well, I'll just start by saying if you haven't gathered already, I don't really plot a lot in advance, so I'm doing it as I go. So if you're doing it over several books, it makes it a little difficult to leave enough nuggets behind because the other books are already out in print. You can't change them. And but also leave each book being a satisfying read on its own. Um, and so this was the last book, so I got to dump things into it and wrap things up. But it was fun, and I think I'd do it again. I think I say this, but I'm not sure I would do it. I might try and plan it out in advance, but if you've heard me talk before, you know that the fun for me is the figuring it out along the way. And so if I plotted specifically 3 books out in advance or 4 books out in advance, then I really don't even care to write them anymore. It's just not as much fun for me.
Yeah, you've already
I
gotten over the
just
fun of planning it.
send in my outlines and y'all could write your own book.
And is it hard, continuing to come up with new ideas for stories centered around the legal system?
I didn't think it would be, but I I'm like 33 books in. And it does get a little more challenging. I'm not currently practicing, but I do keep up with stuff in the legal system. There's plenty of news and plenty of shows and plenty of podcasts, and that's my clumsy segue into my next book, True Two Truths and a Crime. Thank you, Ruth, for that wonderful title. Um,
Okay.
I struggled over it for like 2 months and then finally was happy with that. But it's about a former prosecutor who becomes a podcaster, a true crime podcaster. And I really like that, looking at that aspect of it. I've been a huge Dateline, all the shows. And as much as I like watching Keith Morrison on the big screen, I do like the convenience of a podcast and that you can just listen to it in your car. You can pick it up again when you're taking a walk or wherever. It's very portable and it's fun. And I just thought it would be, and it's a popular thing now. And I thought it would be fun to write from that perspective, of getting to investigate without being trapped by um, law. Like you
One
get
of
to
the
be a
advantages
little,
of the system of
yeah,
television.
exactly. Um, and so that's my next idea, but it is becoming a little harder to think of fresh ideas. But I have no doubt the legal system and criminal justice stories in the news will keep giving.
Yeah, you'll get plenty of stories from it, I think. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kirsten.
Thank you.
Next up, I'm going to chat with Chelsea, Chelsea Linford. So Chelsea learned to read around age 3 and never looked back. After starting with series like The Boxcar Children, Sweet Valley, and The Babysitter's Club, she moved on to slightly more sophisticated fare. Today, she enjoys anything from historical nonfiction to contemporary mysteries and, of course, sapphic romance. Her writing journey began in the first grade and has ranged from fan fiction to sports journalism. Her debut novel was released in 2024, and her second novel will be available this July. She's currently working on her next novel about a basketball star and her best friend. Chelsea lives in Texas with her cats, where she dreams of a future with real seasons. She has a bachelor's degree in history and an MBA. In her free time, she enjoys watching sports, traveling, photography, Lego, and video games. Hi, Chelsea.
Hello.
So I'll start with the same question to begin. So what most interests you about your book and why?
So this is a book, Crossing Bridges. Um, So the thing that I found most interesting about it, and one of the reasons I wanted to write it, was how it explores the impact of mental health issues that so many of us face, and how that can be a challenge not only to establishing a relationship but also just everyday life sometimes.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, that's great. And for this is your debut, so I suppose why did you choose to explore mental health for that first book?
So full transparency, I've dealt with depression since I was a teenager. And I think that my generation has done a really good job about destigmatizing mental health. Perhaps not good enough given the current political environment in the United States, but we've made progress. But even as a teenager, like, I didn't want to say anything. And I remember my mom taking me to a therapist for the first time when I was about 16, and I refused to say a word. Spent the entire time crying. Couldn't just couldn't bring myself to admit that I needed help and there was a problem. So it's very important to me. It's very near and dear to my heart. So that's why I wanted to make it a focus of the book, and do my part to destigmatize it and kind of not only spread awareness but also like representation. Like, there are people out there like me, like a lot of other people, and it's perfectly fine.
That's great. Absolutely. Thank you. So how did the inclusion of mental health issues impact the development of your main characters and their relationship?
So the book is very like character driven. It's really not so much external forces that are preventing them from getting their happily ever after, but the characters themselves. And so one of the characters, Quinn, a lot of the book is kind of the slow reveal of not only what her issues are, but kind of how they've been impacted by events in her life and how she has dealt with them in the past, and kind of comes to a head and she's kind of forced to deal with them. And a big part of that, or any sort of mental health in a relationship, is the idea of trust, right? Like, you trust your partner enough to not only tell them what's going on with you and tell them your history about it, but also ask for help, and be able to acknowledge when you're not okay and maybe you need someone or something else to help you along the way. And so that is a big part of why those two have to work to get there happily ever after. I mean, there's also a character that has panic attacks as well, and so it's a slightly less of a focus on that just because of the way that the book unfolds, but it is again something that she has to learn to deal with, rather than just ignore, which is her preferred method of dealing with it.
That's great. And I do like that it's, even if it isn't the focus of the book, it's there, because in real life, those things are just there. They do happen, to people in general. So that's great. And obviously you've dealt with a lot of these kind of issues yourself, but did you have to do much research for the book?
Yeah, so the ways in which the depression manifests in the book is not entirely like just specifically the way it works for me. I wanted to make sure I kind of represented. So, and I don't have panic attacks, thankfully, that I'm aware of, and I think I would know by now. So both my undergraduate and graduate degrees were very research based, so I'm very familiar with doing that type of stuff. So I kind of went two ways. I wanted to, and I apologize if you can hear my cat. She's got a lot to say about this, and she's also not allowed in the room right now.
Very welcome. It's okay.
So I did two things. One, I wanted to kind of do sort of the medical research and kind of the clinical, or what are the definitions of depression and panic attacks? What are the clinical markers for diagnosing that and what they have? And so that was part of it. And then the other half that I did was, anecdotal. Like, how does it, I know how it worked for me. How does it work for other people? What, particularly with the panic attacks? Because again, I don't have that myself. I don't know anyone personally that I'm aware of who's shared with me that they have that. So that was more, how does it primarily manifest for the majority of people? Are there signs beforehand, or do they come out of nowhere, and things like that, to kind of make it be as realistic and believable and representative of the actual thing for anyone that truly has that. So yeah, lots of research.
Great. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chelsea.
Thank you.
And Sandy is putting links, by the way, to the books that are being spoken about in the chat roll, so you can go and look there and go buy them, please. Brilliant. Next up, Sam. So I'm just going to go through the bio. So Sam Liddell is the author of 8 novels. Originally from Dallas-Fort Worth, Liddell now resides in Denver, Colorado. She works in education by day, and writes sapphic historical and fantastical stories in her free time. Her next novel will be out in May. Hi, Sam.
Hello.
I'm going to do the same question. So what is it that most interests you about your book and why?
Sure. So I'll be speaking about my 2024 release, Adrift. And for me, the thing I found most interesting about writing this story was the setting. And a lot of times the setting is what drives the story for me, in particular when it comes to my historical romances. But along with the setting, it was also the local lore that came with where this story takes place. That really drove a lot of the story. This particular novel takes place in 1920s Southern California during Prohibition. And so that in itself kind of set the stage for a lot of really fun and interesting history that I could pull from.
Great. And what research was done to explore that?
Well, I'll preface by saying that I move a lot. And I was living in Southern California for several years, back around, I think it was like 2017. And for anyone familiar with that region of the United States, I was living in Ocean Beach, sometimes known as OB, a little neighborhood that's like right on the water in San Diego. Um, and I was living in what I now have dubbed the shoebox by the sea. It was a very, very tiny apartment. And since my living quarters were so small, I got out as much as I could. And fortunately, I was living in a really beautiful place with ideal weather, so I could walk around a lot and I could explore. And I was very close to the area of Sunset Cliffs. It's a natural park in that part of town that stretches, I think, some 60 plus acres up along the coast, along the Pacific Ocean. So I would wander from my apartment to the other side of the hill where the really gorgeous homes were, across from the cliffs, and I would just walk around. I'd take my dog sometimes, and I'd admire the view from the cliffs. I would also admire the absolutely gorgeous homes. And some of the homes that existed were still the like original historical homes that had been preserved from early on in the like late 19th, early 20th century. And there was one home in particular that caught my eye, and it was this pink mansion by the ocean. And the color, of course, was something in itself, but I was just so intrigued by that. And that particular house is what drove me to start doing some research about that place.
Brilliant. And how did those things inspire your characters or your story?
So much. The story was fueled by the legend that I started getting pieces of. The longer I lived there, I would hear more stories about the cliffs in general and about that house. And while I was living there, I'd hear different things, but I heard stories about how during Prohibition, rum smugglers would use tunnels that were exposed beneath the cliffs, like during low tide, to transport goods. And supposedly, those tunnels led directly to the cellar of that particular house. And that in itself, I was like, wow, that is such an interesting nugget of legend of history. And so I decided that if I ever wrote a story that took place in San Diego or thereabouts, I would have to incorporate that somehow because it was just too good not to. And so fast forward several years, and I finally had the characters for this novel. Because this novel is first and foremost a romance, a historical romance, and the love story between the two main characters, the two women, Jeanette and Alice. It's, of course, set against the backdrop of Prohibition and set against the Southern California region. So dealing with that particular time, you have the strict laws of Prohibition, but you also have the lawless nature of rum smuggling. And that was such an interesting sort of dichotomy to me, and it inspired me to create characters that I realized the more that I developed them, both women were kind of breaking the law in their own way, to essentially gain some sense of autonomy over their lives for the time period that they were living in. For example, my character, Alice, she's a pickpocket, and she works for her overbearing parents. And so, she does what she can here and there to get some semblance of freedom out from underneath the very harsh eye that she lives beneath. And then there's the other character, Janeth, who she works in a cannery kind of before the story starts, and she gets taken in by this elderly, generous benefactor figure. And she's the one who lives in the great mansion by the sea. And she sort of reluctantly becomes the leader of this clandestine rum smuggling business. And so there's an edge of danger that all of the characters in the novel, but particularly those two women, are sort of living right up against over the course of the story. So it was really fun for me to navigate that, the backdrop and the world that they're living in, but also, you know, how the romance factors into that and how you can develop that alongside all of those things. I do, of course, fictionalize San Diego for the novel. But the county itself is San Diego County. The cliffs are there, but the neighborhood that I drop the characters into, in particular, Janeth, it's known as Seaside, California. But a lot of the streets are the same. A lot of the surrounding neighborhoods are the same. I did a lot of a lot of looking at maps for the writing of this novel. Pulled a lot of old maps that I could find, so I could honor the authenticity of that region, but of course put my own spin on it.
Did anything else draw you to writing about that, time period specifically?
Yeah, one of the things I enjoy about historical novels in general is the clothing. And I find that kind of funny because I would probably consider myself the farthest thing from a fashionable human being, but I am very much, I guess I appreciate the styles of other eras. I've written the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s, and they each have their distinct fashion sense. And um, I find clothing is a really great way to inform character too. And I write a lot of class disparity between my characters, and you can learn a lot very quickly by how characters dress themselves, who has the means to afford certain things. And clothing is also a fun way to, um, deal with the romance side of things, especially in historical novels. There's quite literally a lot of layers to work through. And so there can be really fun ways to kind of tease the romance with the clothing of the time period.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Sam.
Mhm.
So next up, I'm going to chat with Sherry Lewis Wole. So try to catch up with the award-winning author, Sherry Lewis Wole, when she's out running, and you undoubtedly will because she's really, really slow. She said that, not me. When not working on completing half marathons in all 50 states, the former human remains detection canine handler is writing her stories filled with danger and the paranormal. Sherry, along with her trusty German Shepherd Juice, makes her home in NE, Washington State, where there are plenty of mountains and forests. While she has yet to encounter a werewolf, vampire, or demon, she continues to keep a vigilant watch when the sun goes down and darkness falls. Hey, Sherry.
Hi.
So, what most interests you about your book and why?
Well, in this one, I would call it typical Sherry because it's got the paranormal and the battle of good versus evil, which, like Carson said, I did spend my career in the judiciary with about a little over 30 years. And so, I always saw evil a lot. So in my books, I like to balance the scales, but in a different way, with the paranormal involved. And so in this book, I also wanted to do it a little differently because, as you mentioned, I'm a former canine handler, and though my partners were always German Shepherds, in this book, I was thinking, well, wait a minute, what about some of the other giant breeds? And an Anatolian Shepherd is considered a guardian. And so I'm like, I think I'd like to work with a guardian. And what would the guardian be guarding? Well, in the normal world, it would be sheep or cattle or goats or something like that. But in my book, they're guarding against demons. So to me, that made perfect sense that these dogs would go out. And in this book, they probably play a bigger role because you'll find dogs in so many of my books. I can't help it. They just are. But sometimes they play a minor role. In the Guardians, you're going to see them play a major role in this battle of good versus evil.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And so as you mentioned, you're a former canine handler. So how close do the dogs in The Guardian track with your real life search dogs?
Actually pretty close. What you'll see how them working in the book is really a lot like how we'd work the search dogs or even the law enforcement dogs, because there are great similarities in how the dogs work. It's just a different discipline. And as they talk about how the dogs were trained in the book, that's very similar too. One of the things you see in the book, and the characters that aren't familiar with the dogs will question it, is when they send the dogs out to work, the dogs are gone and you don't see them. And they're like, is this okay? Something's happened because we don't see the dog. And often when you're working your dogs, you send them off to do the job and you wait. You don't see them. But that's because they're working. And the dogs are trained to do their job and then come and let you know. And so you see that in the book, and that is very similar to how real search dogs and real detection dogs work. And so I tried to keep it pretty close to what we actually do when we're in the field.
That's fascinating. Very interesting. And what drew you to Mount St. Helen as the main setting for the battle, the good versus evil?
Well, I had to find a good place for demons to hang out, just waiting for their chance to, invade the world and take over. But I'm going to go way back and before probably a lot of you were even born. But I lived in Spokane in 1980 when Mount St. Helens blew. And I'm telling you, that was the most surreal thing ever. The entire world here was covered in ash. It started raining down at first and nobody knew what it was. Of course, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have any of that stuff at the time. So it was hours before anybody had any clue what was happening. And so even here in Spokane, several hundred miles away from Mount St. Helens, it looked like the apocalypse had happened. And I actually wasn't at home that day, but I had left my bedroom window open, just a crack. And when I got home, the entire bedroom was gray because it was covered in ash. And Mount St. Helens itself was absolutely destroyed. It was, I can't even describe what it looked like. But so in my head, as I'm thinking about a good place to do this, I'm thinking, well, yeah, it looked like evil destroyed it. And so what if, it's still an active volcano? What if the demons are down there where it's nice and hot, just hanging out, waiting to come out? And we use that as the setting. How I thought it seemed perfect. And
Yeah.
so that's how I landed on Mount St. Helens, just because of what I saw from personal experience. And trust me, even all these years later, I can still see that clearly in my head because it was so bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, if you've experienced that, then that's a great thing to pull on for your book. Book stuff aside, because all that's great, but I want to hear about the marathons. Where are you? How far have you gone with completing the 50 states?
So I'm 13 states down. Number 14 was supposed to be next month when I go to Left Coast Crime, because as it happens, there's a half marathon Saturday morning. So I was going to go do that until I got a stress fracture in my leg about a month ago. And I just got off crutches yesterday. And the doctor keeps saying I cannot go run that one. I'm like, how about if I walk it? And he still said no. So 14 is off until May, and then we're going to Vegas. And a couple of buddies and I are doing number 14. So I'm going to have to try and find somewhere in there to get 15 and 16 this year.
Brilliant. That's awesome. Good luck with that. Thank you very much. And last but not least, we have Chris Bryant. So Chris writes contemporary romance and erotica. She enjoys binge watching shows, snacking, and working with animal shelters around the world through her Patreon page. She's presently working on her 23rd full-length novel with Bold Strokes Books. Hello.
Hello.
So same question as you've heard a lot. What most interests you about your book and why?
So my book Gaze is out now. It's the last in the Senses books. I've written Taste, Touch, Scent, Listen, and they're all standalone books. And then this is the fifth and final. I know there are more senses, but I stopped at 5. And trying to write romance books and keep it fresh is hard, especially when you've hit 20 books. And so I thought, well, maybe writing something, the senses. Okay, so this works, and there's 5 new books. Boom, done. It gives me, it's challenging. It gives me subject matter, and it's new and different. So that was kind of how I came up with it. And with it being the final book, I just went all out and I wrote it. It takes place in Kansas City, where I live. And so when you write about kind of like how Sherry and everybody really, when you write about a book that takes place in your hometown, it comes across on the page. You can really read the love that you have for this town. It comes through. Even my editor, she's like, oh yeah, when you write about your hometown, you feel it more. The reader feels it more. It's a lot more seamless, the transitions between, like, I know exactly how long it takes to get from Union Station down to the plaza. I don't have to research it. I don't have to go down any rabbit holes. I know exactly, what it looks like. And like the opening scene it takes place in our library, and our Kansas City's public library is very, I say famous, because a lot of people have seen the outside of it. You see the big giant books that are on the outside of the library. It's kind of people have seen it on Facebook. It's just a popular place. And it's actually the garage that you're seeing. It's not really the library. The library is right next to it. It's a big, huge, gorgeous building. I love going there. But on the very top, I think on the 6th floor, there's a giant chessboard. And there's like little stations where people can sit and work, and there's benches, and there's like little gardens. It's absolutely gorgeous. And right outside, there are all these tall, it's like right downtown. So there's a lot of tall buildings. And I was standing there one day, and you can actually look into other people's, like, people live there, and you can look into people's where they live. And so I thought that would be kind of cool. Like, wouldn't it be cool if like 2 people saw each other but they couldn't really talk because it's too far away. But it would be a great story. Like, how would they communicate? Like, and but you could see them, but like, how would you make this work? And so I just decided, okay, gaze, it's perfect. They meet through a look, and kind of a play on gaze, GAZE, GAYS, whatever. So I kind of made it fun that way, and just keeping it fresh, like I said, just for myself. I had fun with it being in Kansas City, and it's fun for the reader because, like, I went all out. I brought in all these characters from past books, and I also, Shameless and Not Guilty took place in Kansas City. I wrote those books under Britt Ryder, so they are main, or they're secondary characters in this book. So like, I went all out. I brought them in this book, and so you get a lot of all the characters and little Easter eggs, and it was just a lot of fun for me to write.
You pretty much answered all of my questions and
Oh,
more.
sorry.
That's okay, but I'm going
I
to
got
ask
all into it. I was like so excited. This is such a
how
fun
many
book.
windows were you looking into to make this research of this book work? Were you just going around looking in everyone's windows?
Oh yeah, basically. No, it was just a lot of fun, and I tried to challenge myself with this book. Normally I'd like to build up the tension, the characters. That's kind of one of my things. It's like, I like building up the sexual tension, and are they gonna kiss? What happens here? No, let's go. Usually, and I usually, once I do get to the sex, I write it, and I write several scenes. But this one, it just went backwards. Like, it's like boom, right out of the gate. And I normally don't do that. So so I had to write it backwards, where well, I'm not going to ruin it. I kind of sort of did, but it was just a different way to write the romance and write the story and how it's successful and how they succeed as a couple. So I don't know. I had a lot of fun writing this
Is it
one.
different from the usual conflict twist stuff that
Different how than I normally do it. No, different, just a different romance for me.
that's great. Awesome. Anything else?
I know.
No? Okay. Great. That's everyone then. So the chat is open if anyone has any questions. We have a little bit of time, so if you want to put any questions in there, we can go through them. If not, we can just stare at each other for a few minutes. Okay. This part is always fun, waiting to see if someone sends questions, and if they don't, then just babbling like I'm doing right now.
I want you to say 23 again.
Me,
Yes.
23.
Okay.
Why? What way did I say it earlier?
Because your accent, it was really cute when you said 23.
Her
When you
accent's cute when
introduced
she
it.
says anything.
Well, that's true. Yes. Little Irish accent.
What accent? I don't have an accent. Only if you have accent.
Yeah. Own it. It's awesome.
It is.
Oh, okay. So Sandy's trying to challenge you all, but what was the what was the most boring thing about your book, basically?
Most boring thing.
You can all hop in whenever you want. Well, she said least fascinating. I'm just changing it to boring.
Boring.
For me, it goes with conflict. I absolutely hate conflict. I hate writing conflict. It's really hard, and to always find conflict when you've written, like, again, over 20 books, trying to find the
23.
conflict. 23. Especially if you did, like, unlike Carson, and you have the court and you have the
Built-in
mystery.
conflict.
Yeah, that's kind of built in. You're going to have that conflict. But in it's romance, I mean, how many conflicts can you have in romance books? So finding the conflict is really, really hard. It just is. It's, and after so many times, I mean, how many times can you miscommunicate? How many times? It's just,
What do you
it's really
think?
hard to keep it fresh and fascinating. And that is what I struggle with. So I would like at some point to branch out to different genres. That is something I would like to do. Maybe not murder mystery, because I'm terrible at that. I am fascinated with it, but I know I would be terrible at it.
I mean, just kind of riffing off that, I wonder, I kind of feel like conflict is not, it's kind of becoming, maybe it's the outer world. There's so much conflict that sometimes it's nice to read a book that doesn't have that steep of a conflict, I mean, I'm seeing that a lot more where the conflict isn't as insurmountable and it's just kind of cozy.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I've been writing, cozy conflict the
You know what I
last.
enjoy reading at the moment? It's like there's enough happening. I want
Right,
something that I know it's going to
exactly.
be fine in a couple of pages, not a couple of chapters right now.
Because
Yeah.
I mean, like even in my book, there's no reason for these characters not that there is really no conflict. It's just that
Others.
one character has a secret,
Mhm.
and then one character is busy and doesn't really want to get involved. But I mean, that's not insurmountable conflict. We're all busy people. But and the secret is, the other one doesn't want her to know her secret, and if you get too close, you learn people's secrets. But I just I feel like mine is I'll just share. It's mostly plot conflict, but it's the characters getting together. I just feel like sometimes it doesn't have to be like there doesn't have to be this incredibly dark moment where, we
Be
know that
them
they're
against the
separate.
issue instead of them being the issue.
Yeah, I love those, but I also kind of like where it's cozy.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have anything on the least fascinating, or will I jump to them?
The only thing I could really think of, as much as I love setting for my stories, when I have to get down to like the nitty-gritty details, like especially when it comes to like the layout of the big house, I'm so bad about getting turned around in my own layout that I end up having to do really poor drawings of, okay, which room is where and what part of the house are they in and which way do the stairs go? Because then there's like doors that lead to nowhere later on in the book, and it all is chaotic. So that part I don't like as much when I have to get that part drawn
Dorothy
out
is
for
the
the story.
secret seller.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of piggyback off that because I was gonna say I feel like the setting is probably the least fascinating part of this. It's set in Vermont primarily. There's some a little bit in New York and Boston, but um, while Vermont is, I like it. It doesn't. You could have probably put it in another ski town near some major cities and probably been able to get that wasn't the point of the story. It could have taken place in other settings. So I feel like Vermont was not particularly fascinating in my opinion.
See, and I think I go the opposite direction. And maybe it's because I've spent so much time outside and we've done some really interesting things outside during some of our searches. I find the setting really interesting, and I hope that people do too when they read. And maybe they, like Chris said earlier, that our love for that comes through when we write it. I hope.
Great. What's something that you find fascinating that you haven't written about yet and that you might in the future?
Well, as you said in my intro, my next novel is going to be about a basketball star, and I am a big sports fan, and so I've been very eagerly awaiting getting to dive into a character in the world of women's basketball, and then hopefully later down the road, women's soccer, and then who knows what else. I love sports romances. I love sports. I love women. So getting to combine all those is fantastic, and I'm very excited to get to that.
Anyone else? There's a couple of other questions in the Q&A we can jump to as well anyway. So Chris, you already kind of said about jumping genre, but someone's asked if you were going to jump genre, what would you like to try? To Chris.
Me, personally, a lot of people are doing it, but I would love to write a dystopian. I like to watch, I love anything dystopian. I like watching zombie stuff. I like apocalyptic things. That's just my jam. I like reading books like that. And I thought, I mean, it's not, I know they're not big sellers unless you write like The Hunger Games or something like that, which probably will not be me, but you never know. Uh, that is, and I kind of have something in my head that maybe I'm gonna work on. I don't know, but Silo, yeah,
Safe
something like that. But yeah, that's kind of what I would do if I were to jump genre. It would be that.
Would that be like cozy dystopian?
No
Definitely
conflict.
not. There would be massive conflict, and then it would be okay because it probably wouldn't be a romance.
I would totally read a cozy dystopian book.
They would
Like
never
this
leave the place.
massive stuff happening, but they're just fine.
Right.
They're
They're
not-
going to
It's
be
like
boarded
sitting by
up
the
as
fire.
somewhere.
Are we
They're
not
gonna be
living in
like
a
a cellar.
cozy dystopian right now, or?
Yeah, exactly. Well, some of us.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Anyone else thinking of jumping genre, or have you?
I wrote a book, Spirit of the Law, that had a medium. And that's always fascinated me. And I've always wanted to write something that was more paranormal or sixth sense focused or, something like that. So that I've kind of kicked that around.
Carson, you can write the sixth in my series.
There
The
you go.
Okay,
There you
please.
go.
Thank you.
On it. Inspired by Chris Bryant.
Done.
Okay.
I was just gonna add real quick.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I've written a few different genres. My first novel was contemporary, kind of YA, and then I do historical and fantasy. So I kind of already jump a little bit. But if I jumped back, I have ideas for a contemporary, kind of like Chelsea was saying, contemporary sports romance, because I was an athlete, and I played lacrosse in college. So a lacrosse romance could maybe be something I do down the road if I go back to that. I would love to be able to do a mystery, but I don't think I have the capabilities. I admire mystery
Totally.
writers so much because the intricacy of those plots, it just blows my mind how they're able to execute that. I'd love to, but I don't think I can.
You can. You totally can.
See, I'm kind of the opposite because of Sam, because I write contemporary so far, and I'd love to write something historical. So down the TV written list somewhere.
It's fun if you enjoy research.
I do.
And I want to go full on thriller with no paranormal in it.
Oh,
But haven't had very good luck with keeping the paranormal out, so I'm not making any promises, even if I do write the thriller.
It'll be there somewhere.
Could be.
A really interesting question. Have you ever had characters that you would love to write about, but you don't have a plot to put them into? So characters that are there or that you'd love, but you don't know their story yet.
sometimes I can't tell you because, but yeah, there's sometimes I think of things that, it's like things start with an idea, and the idea can be the person, the idea can be the story, the idea can be the setting. And sometimes I have an idea for a person, and then you just have to kind of write the story around them. So I might have somebody in my notebook that has a story yet to be thought of.
When I was writing my second novel, by the time I got to the end of it, there was a side character who I was like, I want to give her something. Like, I want to give her a story and give her, something more than just the role she plays in this book. I have no idea what that would be or anything. So that kind of happened accidentally, but maybe someday.
I find that happens with side characters a lot.
Yeah.
Their way of trying to hold on longer.
Yeah. And I've had several get their own books. So and that I didn't intend to when I first started writing. So that's kind of a good bonus.
Great. I think that's all the questions. Anyone have anything they want to add? No? Great. Thank you so much. It's been great chatting with you all and hearing about the wonderful books. And like I said, the links are all there in the chat, so you can go on and buy them all, and read about the Pink House and the people staring in windows and everything else involved. Thanks all. Bye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.